This is Businesswomen Australia podcast, featuring industry leaders who bring their wealth of expertise from diverse areas to help you build a successful business. Now, onto the show. And welcome to another episode of Business Women Australia podcast. So my guest today says, I live with lots of spaces in my day and I have never been happier. And joining me on today's show is Emma Gray. Emma, she is a leadership coach. She's an author, a speaker, a meditation teacher, and clinical psychologist. And her international best-selling book, Inspired Living, is co-authored with Dr. Larry Farwell. And he is a Harvard-trained neuroscientist featured in Time Magazine's top 100 Innovators of the Century. Now, Emma, she helps soul-driven business women boost their impact and their income and find more balance and ease. And she loves helping women reduce their stress, restore their balance, and create time and energy for the things they really want to do. And she and her team specialize in mindfulness-based leadership coaching programs and wellness retreats for women to make transformational change in their business and their personal lives. Now, on today's show, Emma's going to share how we can discover that meditation can be our business superpower. We'll also discover how radical self-care, it is an essential foundation for building a business that you love and having more time and energy for the things that you love to do, as well as to discover how we can follow our soul-driven purpose, and that will make us far more invincible. So welcome to the show, Emma.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. I'm really excited to be here. Great to see you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. As I said before we went live, we've already had a lot of conversation and discussion and comments on this topic, something that we can really see is resonating with people. And now so much more, I think, after the last 3 years of what many of us have gone through and so forth. And so glad to have you feature your expertise on the show. Before we dive into the topics, the quote that we started with is something that you say, I live with lots of spaces in my day and you've never been happier. Share a little bit more about that, Emma.
So at one point in my journey, Anne-Marie, I burnt out. I was working too hard. I was a self-sacrificing people pleaser. I was doing everything for everyone else, trying to balance family and working and all of the other hats that we wear as women. And it just became too much for me. And I got really depleted and really run down and really unwell. My whole life fell apart. But since then, I guess, while that was an awful thing, also it was one of the greatest gifts that I've experienced, because it really gave me great clarity on the things that are really helpful for me and replenishing for me, but also the things that deplete me. And so I figured out that rather than putting all my time and energy into things that just make me feel worse and worse and worse and worse, really that it's important for me to only say yes to the things that are in my highest best interest and that are going to energize me, because I know that then I'm going to have much more energy and time and attention for the people around me, for the things around me that are really important. So I've learned that taking spaces in my day, giving myself time out to replenish, then I come back with much more energy, much more presence, much more focus, and I'm much more effective in what I do. So, it made me feel
something that we could all learn from, for sure. And if you think back to when you started to recognize how important this was, or I would imagine it was, you got to a stage where you thought, look, something has to change, because if I continue that saying, if I continue to do the same things, it's not serving me and it's certainly not serving those around me. When you recognize that and started to make those changes, how long was that journey? I mean, the journey never finishes, does it? But I just wonder if you'd share that, because sometimes we often can give up quite easily when we're starting to make those changes, the important ones that we want to stick with.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Anne-Marie. It was quite a few years ago now when my babies were little and I was up all through the night and sleep deprived. So while that's a beautiful question, I actually can't remember the answer. I was so sleep deprived at the time, but it didn't happen overnight. So not to set expectations for the listeners that you meditate, for a week and then suddenly your life turns around. It's a slow, gradual progression. But having said that, we can start to feel the changes, even small changes, once we start. So, sorry, that wasn't a very satisfactory answer, was it, Anne
No,
Marie?
it was actually. There's so many rich lessons that we can learn in that, because so often, I don't know about you, maybe it is, many of us who are driven and we like to see results and so forth, we can often be our own worst enemies because of the impatience. The drive can often lead to impatience,
Yeah.
and we try and change so many different things because, as you mentioned, there were a lot of things that you eventually needed to change. It's not being
Mm,
able to, or not taking on so much, being able to
mm,
say no. I mean,
mm,
that in and of itself, I think for many of us can be a huge lesson, because it can
mm,
free up time. We're not consistently always saying yes and feeling guilty then, because that's what we often will do too when we're trying to make some changes, is that while we may say no, whilst that frees up our time, we end up carrying, a weight on our shoulder of guilt and so forth. So even the smallest of changes can make a huge difference. And we can untap that a little bit more in the second point about radical self-care being really essential. But let's
mm,
talk about meditation. What were some of the things that you started to do,
mm.
and seeing that this now plays a very important role in your life and obviously in your business?
Yeah. So I started meditating just 5 minutes or so each day. It wasn't a long time because, I had young children and I was busy and didn't have a lot of time. Um, uh, but it, I really started to notice actually a difference when I did it. And I can remember the first time that I went into a deep meditation, and my body relaxed actually deeply, probably for the first time ever. It was like my whole body went, ah. And I realized in that moment, because I'd always been quite an anxious person, that probably I'd been anxious in a state of some kind of anxiety for most of my life. And it wasn't until that moment that my body let go. And so it was a really beautiful and profound moment for me. So I think from that moment, I became addicted.
Mm,
And I do try and meditate every day if I can. Ideally for 15 minutes, sometimes half an hour, but even if it's only for a minute or two, I do try and do something, because
yeah,
I really notice on the days when I haven't meditated how, the stress starts to creep in, the wobbles start to creep in, the lack of balance starts to creep in, and I feel a little bit more frazzled in my day, versus the days that I meditate. I do notice that I feel much calmer.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I just started with 5 or 10 minutes of just finding some of my favorite guided meditations, which were some gentle music, a voice directing me to focus on my breath. So it was quite simple. I didn't do anything fancy back then. So yeah, and bit by bit, it did start to transform how I felt. Mm.
Yeah. And I think that it's the habit that you're starting to create in that slowing down, isn't it? In being still and not kind of with many thoughts go through our mind, on a daily basis. And it's really trying to get to that stage where you're not consistently bombarding on the go, all the time. And did you find, or do you find that, there's different things? Like some people say, I love to go walking in nature because when I'm in nature, I settle down, I'm able to breathe. For others, it's music. Others, it might be doing some gentle stretching. Do you find that the meditation, if you will, differs for different people, and what really resonates with them?
Yes, absolutely. There is not one size fits all. There's not one solution. I've probably worked with hundreds, maybe even thousands of clients over the years now, and I see that they each have different preferences and different capacities for different practices. Some people will meditate and love meditation. Other people aren't interested or don't want to do it. So exactly as you've said, there are other things that we can do. We can spend time in nature to slow down. We can spend time with our pets. We can listen to our favorite music. We can put on some essential oils. We can do some yoga or some stretching. There are lots and lots of different ways to start to slow down, to start to find those moments of stillness in our day.
Yes. I remember working with a coach years ago now, and one of the things that she shared with me was the breathing. And it wasn't until she shared with me the exercise that I realized that, I mean, breathing is a very good thing. And actually, it's a vital thing in part of life, but many of us don't breathe properly, do we? We need to take those deep breaths, and as we know, oxygen feeds our brain, and if we're only taking short breaths, we may not be giving our body the oxygen and other things that it needs. Can you talk a little bit about how the breath is so important? Because you mentioned not only just kind of sitting still and listening to music, but actually breathing as well. Has that become a very important part of the process that you do?
Yes, for sure. And I utilize lots of different breathing techniques with my clients because, again, different people like different things. And exactly as you've said, Anne-Marie, sometimes or often when we're in a state of stress or anxiety or overwhelm, when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, we breathe in a very shallow way. We might breathe very quickly. We're not doing those deep breaths into the belly, which is when we're doing those deep breaths, that's when we're activating what's called our body's parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest system, our relaxation system, when the whole body's gone, So yeah, even just taking a handful of deep breaths into the belly can be really helpful, a really quick, simple way to turn off the stress system and to turn on that relaxation system, which starts to then rewire the brain, rewire the body, can have quite profound changes.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the neuroscientist. If I remember, I'll share. But I
Mhm.
was listening to her share on a podcast about how, because we're so much on the go, particularly the youth, and even now many of us as adults, we carry our digital devices around with us, so our mind is always on the go. And she was saying that the body and kind of the mind, if you look at neuroscience, it needs time to settle, for the information in our brains, if you will, I'm paraphrasing, to settle and go into the different folders that that we have, and so forth. And if we don't give our bodies and our minds time to do that, we can constantly be on the go all of the time.
Mm,
And
mm,
she was saying, look, even 10, 20 minutes a day, if we can do
mm,
that, it really helps. When it comes to the breathing and what you're doing, I mean, obviously say anything that you start off with first is going to be helpful, then kind of build onto that. But are there studies that show that if we can do that regularly for a certain time frame, that this is definitely going to give back the restoration and so forth that we need? Is there kind of a guide to timing?
So there is there's a mountain of research, Anne-Marie, to back up what you've just talked about, that we, in our modern society, live in our heads. We're very disconnected from our bodies because we spend so much time on screens, and we're thinking, which doesn't give us time, actually, especially if those thoughts are stressful, which they often are. It doesn't give us time to turn off that stress system and turn on the relaxation system, which in that state, in that relaxation state, that's the state that is optimal for us to be in, for the body to boost the immune system and repair cells and do all those regenerative processes that it's harder for the body to do when the stress system is activated. So even just a few minutes a day, ideally 15 to 20 minutes would be fantastic, but even just 1 minute a day, a minute here, a minute there, will help, because it's turning off that stress system and turning on the relaxation system, which really helps the body start to find its balance. The body is self-healing, self-balancing, self-soothing, if we give it the space to do that. And it doesn't have to be that 15 minutes doesn't have to be 15 minutes in meditation. It could be, as we said before, 15 minutes in nature, focusing on what we can see and hear and the sound of the birds and the smells of the flowers. Anything like that is slowing down our thinking mind, and it's turning on that relaxation system in the body. There's been fascinating research in the area of nature and seeing nature and spending time in nature. It's called biophilia. And the research shows that over a week, if we spend 2 hours in nature, it might be 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, that will have a significant impact on our mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Even if we're just looking at a pot plant or looking at a tree out a window, we don't have to be in the park. That exposure to nature really soothes our nervous system. So any of those kind of practices are really beneficial.
Yes. What I've noticed over the last couple of months, I've started to, and who knew that I could do this even, start growing a bit of a garden. So I've got a bit of a hothouse. There is nothing more relaxing that I find than I go out just with a colander, cutting leaves for,
Mm,
of some lettuce, or even seeing seedlings grow. And
mm,
even if it's just 5 minutes out there, not even 5 minutes, if it's a little bit
mm,
longer, it's a little bit longer. But I have found that it is so enjoyable. And that's what you're saying, isn't it? It
mm,
completely, the mind just goes into what's going, what's growing, what do I need to move
mm,
around it, and
mm,
it's finding something that you enjoy, and then as
mm.
it continues to when I say consume, but the good way, that it really is something that you're doing, which just everything else just settles. That's what I find. Yeah.
Yeah, that's being present. That's being present in the here and now. And as we're focusing on what we can see, what we can smell, what we can feel with our sense of touch, we are dropping into the present moment. And there's less space for the thinking mind to get really, really busy. We all talk about multitasking, and especially how women are good at multitasking, but actually multitasking is stressful for the human mind. And it can really only focus on one thing at a time. And so if we give our mind something to focus on in the present moment, like feeling our fingers in the earth or looking at the green of the leaves or whatever it might be, as the mind is focusing on that, there is less space for the thoughts to come in, for the worrying thoughts to come in, for the stressful thoughts to come in. And so we're naturally engaging that relaxation system, which is really good for our nervous system. It's really good for our whole mental, emotional, physical well-being. Yeah.
Yeah, so,
It,
so
it,
true.
it's mindfulness. Yeah. Sorry.
It is, it is. And
Yeah.
equally important too, I would imagine, Emma, is to start to recognize when we're thinking about self-care, what environments am I putting myself in that
Mm,
is inhibiting that, or what am I continuing to listen to? Is it, restoring, replenishing, and good, or is it not necessarily good? We need to be very discerning about that, don't we?
mm.
Constantly. Have you found that environment and the environments we put ourselves in can inhibit and impact the self-care aspect?
Yes, 100%. I think that was one of the biggest lessons I learned back when I, went through that experience of burnout. Because my energy was so low and my well-being was so fragile, I really came to know the things, the situations, the people, the environments, the noises, the activities, the relationships that felt like self-care, that felt nurturing and calming, and the ones that felt depleting or stressful or whatever it might be. So, and I'm a highly sensitive person. I don't know if you've heard the term HSP, Anne-Marie. I'm definitely one of those. So I absorb the energy of the environment. I really tune into the emotions and the energy of the people and the places around me. So I've learnt to be much more discerning and aware of everything that I'm ingesting into my system, what I'm watching, what I'm listening to, what I'm hearing, what I'm talking about, and really noticing how that makes me feel. And I guess I didn't know this when I first started because I was so disconnected from my body. I didn't read those signals initially, but I guess because I've been practicing for so long now, I really notice at quite a subtle level how my body responds to everything, and I will pick up quite quickly the situations or the people or whatever it might be that make me feel good, and the things that make my body go, ooh, no, this doesn't feel so good. So yeah, I've had to make some careful decisions about how I spend my time. Yeah.
Yes. So that then leads me to saying that there are going to be situations and maybe even people, that we limit our interaction with it, if you will, or the ability to start to say no to various projects and things. There's a myriad of things that we can help around, and there's a myriad of people that would require our help. But we
Mm,
need to be mindful for the self-care aspect to take on what we can take on and say no.
mm,
For
mm,
someone who struggles to say no, as I'm sure there are many listeners of
mm,
this podcast, that we don't like saying no, we don't want to disappoint people.
mm,
However, when we
mm,
measure it on the scale of self-care or not self-care, it's so important,
mm,
because then that's going to inhibit us in showing up for the people that we do really want to support. What did
mm,
you do as you started to have more conversations with opportunities that you did say, look, I'm sorry, but I'm not able to support? How,
mm,
what are some insights you can share to help us here?
mm, mm. And it's a really good question, Anne-Marie, because a lot of us do struggle to say no, especially as women, because we are conditioned to be um, the yes person, to be the good partner and the good parent and the good child and the good employee, the good boss, the good, all of these hats that we wear. And if we say no, we might get negative responses from people around us, which, as you said at the beginning of our discussion today, sometimes that can raise feelings of guilt or anxiety. So we're conditioned to say yes. So to start to set those boundaries and say no can be really uncomfortable at first. And certainly I found that. I said to you that I was a self-sacrificing people pleaser. I found it very, very difficult to say no initially. Because I was in the place that I was in of that burnout, it got to the point where I didn't have a choice, really, that I had to, in order to be there for my young children, to have the energy to look after them, I had to start saying no to some things that weren't good for me. So I guess I just did it. In psychology, we call it exposure therapy. It's exposing ourselves to the things that might be uncomfortable, but to do it in small, manageable ways. So don't say no to the biggest, scariest, most challenging, most difficult thing first. Maybe start with the little things, with the relationships that are less important, with the issues that are less important. So, if someone asks us out for a coffee, maybe we might say, look, I don't have the space to do that this week, or this, doesn't work for me this week. I'd love to do it, but can we do it later, or whatever it might be. So starting to say no to the little things, and that starts to give us confidence to then, as we start to build those boundaries and notice that actually, while there might be some short-term anxiety or guilt, in the longer term, we start to feel much better. Our vitality returns, our confidence starts to build. It becomes easier and easier to say no. So then we can build up our no muscle. We can build our boundary muscle to start to say no to some of those bigger things. Yeah.
Wow, brilliant, brilliant. I'm sure so helpful. Something else that you said, and I'd love for you to share a little bit more about this, because I think so many women can tend to get stuck in comparison mode and what others are doing. And you said that now that you are far more sensitive to certain things, whereas previously you weren't aware of that. How many of us do you think don't really know about ourselves the
Mm,
things that do energize us and the
mm,
things that completely can deplete us from our energy, or we've only got so much energy for that particular activity, whereas other people, other women may have boundless energy in that activity that absolutely drains us. Do you
mm,
believe the self-awareness that you gained about yourself, Emma,
mm,
gave you what you needed, the strength to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to do this, because you
mm,
knew you were looking after yourself, you were protecting yourself, as you said, you put boundaries around you. How many of us do you think that self-awareness and understanding of what
mm,
does replenish us and restore us, and what does drain us, that we need to have more understanding of what that is
mm.
for us, and that we
Yeah.
don't really? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I think sadly, not too many of us have that self-awareness, Anne-Marie, and not because we're limited, and not because there's a flaw in us as individuals, but more what I was saying before about our conditioning, our cultural and societal conditioning, that we're conditioned to look to others, to help others, to be there for others. And so we are trained to disconnect from our own self-awareness. And because we spend so much time on screens, we're disconnected from our own bodies. So sadly, I think probably not very many of us have a sense of self-awareness. I know I certainly didn't. I can remember the first time I started working with someone and they said, "What are you feeling in your body?" And I said, "I don't know, nothing. I don't know what you're talking about."
Can you maybe change that question so I can understand it? Yeah.
I probably lived in a state of dissociation at some level of my being, and I think sadly that a lot of us do. But that it can change, that with practice and with quite simple practices, we can start to drop awareness into our body, to start to become more aware of what we're feeling, of how we're feeling. I have simple self-check-in process that I invite my clients to do, which has 2 questions. The first question is, how am I feeling? And that might be, as you just pause, and I invite the listeners to do that now, to pause, bring awareness into your body and just notice right now, how is my body feeling? Maybe it's tired, maybe it's hungry, maybe it's thirsty, maybe it's restless, maybe there are some emotions floating around, sensations in the body. When you first ask yourself that question, you might not notice anything, and that's okay. That's where I was when I started. But the more you ask, the more you bring awareness into the body, you will start to be able to sense into that and to be able to answer that question for yourself. So the first question is, how am I feeling? And then the second question is, what do I need now? So this is about meeting the needs of the body, meeting the needs of the emotions, meeting the needs of the mind. It might be that I've been concentrating for a really long time and I just need to take a break. Or maybe it's that I've been sitting for a long time and I need to stand up and stretch. Maybe I'm hungry, I need a snack. Maybe I'm thirsty, maybe whatever it might be. But the more we pause to just check in and notice how we're feeling and start to meet those needs, then it becomes easier and easier to do that. It's got to the point now where I guess I do it so automatically that when I'm in a situation or have been doing something for too long and I need to take a break, for example, I'll start to feel a knot in the pit of my belly, like it'll feel like a little bit of an irritability in my body. So I immediately stop now and I go and take a break or do whatever it is that I need to do. The great thing about that is, I guess, that I now know how to look after myself and take the breaks that I need. And so I don't force myself to do stuff that isn't good for me. The bad thing about that is I now can't force myself to do stuff that isn't good for me. So I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, Anne-Marie.
No, that is so important. It's so important. And, often, or one of the things that I have found to be true is, when we're thinking about networking and associating with people. Now, I didn't realize how much of an introvert I was till we did start getting into lockdowns, and I realized my energy was just bubbling, and I actually longed to have conversations with people. And I would often say to people, look, I'm just going to chat your ear off, and so if you need to go, go. But and then I realized that I've got to be very careful in managing the energy and how much time and around people and so forth. I wasn't aware of that previously, to the extent, if that makes sense. So you can imagine if you've been born into a family who is a very large family, who's got a culture that you're consistently over each other's places all of the time and all of the birthdays and celebrations. To me, when I think of that, on the inside, I'm just going, oh, does that make sense? So
That makes total sense.
there's nothing wrong with you. It's just, that's just the way you're made. And you need to excuse yourself and say, I just need to go and sit in my bedroom with a book, or just to lay there. I need a bit of a nap, and that's going to re-energize you. And being able to do that is very empowering, I think, and being able to say what you need and then ensuring that you do get what you need. And that's just important, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful, Anne-Marie. I'm really glad that you've discovered that for yourself. Yeah, because introverts and sensitive people are usually or often more energized by time alone,
Yeah.
whereas extroverts are energized by time with people. So it can be really helpful to know that. And one isn't better than the other. One isn't right or wrong. It's just, this is how I'm hardwired and this is what I need. So to have awareness around that is fantastic. Yeah, that's great, because then you can do stuff that you know is best for your nervous system. And then when you do connect with people, or then when you do want to put energy into things, then you have the energy to do that.
Yeah, so important. So hopefully by sharing that, it gives others permission to be able to go through and say, well, what energizes me? What drains me? And you said so
Mm,
beautifully, start to notice, start to
mm,
be a little bit more aware on the situations, circumstances, and so forth, and how you're feeling. I love those two questions that you shared with us today. And I know that we have only, Emma, scratched the surface. This is a lifelong not thing, but I can't think of the right word, but really it's a principle that should really be very much part of our day-to-day lives. There's all sorts of things that happen to us, and we want to make sure that we've created enough in us, if you will, or the ability to be able to cope better with things, because we've always got a bit of a reserve there. And if not, then we know, well, I need to plan some time to be able to replenish and just to be. How can people find out more about you, Emma, the work that you do? What's the best way for them to connect and find out?
Sure, yeah. So they can jump onto my website if they like, emmagray, gray.net. They can go there. They're welcome to join my Facebook group. I have a beautiful community of souls. We connect and we meditate together. I do coaching. You can find me Instagram, all sorts of places. I don't know if you'll have show notes afterwards. So yeah, connecting through my website or the social media, and
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And of course, this is with Business Women Australia podcast, and you are part of Business Women Australia. So if people want to find out more as well, you're part of that membership. And I believe you are also based in Sydney. So if people want to connect, I'm sure that there are some wonderful gatherings through BWA that they may have an opportunity to connect with you too. So thank you so much again for taking time out of your day to share this such valuable insights. It's so important about self-care and ensuring that we take care of ourselves, because as we know, as women, we often wear a lot of different hats, don't we? And we want to make sure that we are the best that we possibly can be, so that we can then be the best for those that we care about, so that we can support them in the best possible way too. And it starts with ourselves. Very, very important. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I've really enjoyed our discussion today.
You've been listening to Business Women Australia podcast. Want to become part of a dynamic collective of women who are passionate about business success and personal growth? Go to businesswomenaustralia.com.au/membership to apply. That's businesswomenaustralia.com.au/membership.